so thankful to have Tim here. He's an author, policy advocate, and professor at Columbia Law School. His best-known work is the development of net neutrality theory, but he also writes about private power, free speech, copyright, and antitrust. His books, The Master Switch and The Attention Markets, have won wide recognition and awards. Mr. Wu is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and was formerly a contributing writer at NewYorker.com and contributing editor at The New Republic. He recently ran for lieutenant governor in New York. He was at the FTC. He was at the White House National Economic Council. Just incredible breadth of expertise and experience, and we're so thankful that he could keynote. So please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. Hey, it is the end of a long day, and I like antitrust as much as anyone. In fact, I'm like an aficionado. But even I found I was trying to get tired, so I got to be kind of entertaining up here. So I thought maybe I'd try and tell some antitrust jokes before launching into the substance, about 20 minutes. So I was trying to think, do I know any? So here's one I thought of. What happens, I asked Lena, and I said, well, how about the Robinson-Patman Act? Anyway, that's not very funny, but sorry, that was a terrible joke. But what happens when you cross an antitrust scholar with a mafioso? How's that? Someone who makes you an offer you can't understand. All right, that's what all right, well, I hope I didn't say anything offensive. I know maybe people are offended by the Robinson-Patman. I heard once, is this true? Someone told me once that at some ABA meeting, this is show you just how ABA meetings are, someone gave a talk on the Robinson-Patman Act dressed in a clown outfit, like a full clown outfit. And their theory was like, this is what I think of the Robinson-Patman Act or something like that. I actually personally think it's got, well, let me get to my talk. All right, so originally I had a kind of a PowerPoint, then I realized we don't have AV, so there we go. I'm going to be kind of presenting, the title of my talk is But It's Free, and it's, I think everyone in this room knows that I think the challenges, intellectual and enforcement challenges in this area is what do you do about firms that are ostensibly giving their products away for free? Does that mean they should be immune to any kind of oversight or antitrust enforcement? They would probably say, yeah, that sounds about right. So far it's been about right. And I don't only mean some of the bigger tech firms, but I mean everyone whose business model is premised on freeness. Of course, I, as you'll hear, take the view that we always pay, and we pay with different things, data or attention. And I want to use this time, about 20 minutes, to talk about some of the approaches I think are really useful ways of thinking about this. I'm also, along the way, going to talk, I'm really talking about two of my works up here. One is that, and the other is the book I'm working on right now. And I'll introduce a few of the ideas in there. So that's what I'm going to do, maybe about 20 minutes. So stay tuned, and then we can take some questions if anyone has them. So let me talk a little bit first about what I'm trying to do in this book project I'm working on right now, hoping coming up this summer. Working title, Curse of Bigness Revisited. I have a feeling people in this room know what the original Curse of Bigness, who authored the original Curse of Bigness, obviously Louis Brandeis. And the goal of the book is to re-examine the case against bigness, industrial concentration, that was a centerpiece, arguably of the Sherman Act, but certainly of at least some of the progressive movements, particularly Louis Brandeis and associated figures, and to not only sort of historically and talk about the importance of that movement, but also come to the present time, ask whether, hey, maybe we're facing the curse of bigness again, and try to summon, if we've learned any useful economics or things over the last 50 years, do they give us more perspective? Do they make us believe maybe there was more to these arguments than people thought in the 1980s when they threw everything out? So it's sort of a re-examine, a re-look, and where do we go with that? So one thing I think we're aided in that project is what I would describe as a natural experiment, which is a 20-year, 30-year period, depending how you count, of weaker antitrust enforcement. right? I don't think anyone would deny that. There's been a couple big cases, and I think there's been moments where the agencies have done good work. But overall, no one would deny it's been lower. So what does the economy look like afterwards? And I want to suggest, because antitrust has been on such a starvation diet over the last 20 or 30 years, we're in a position, I think many people in this room are in this position, of almost needing to re-feed parts of the antitrust body corpus that are starved, inebriated, and need work. There's a lot of intellectual and research work that needs to be done. Some people in this room are doing it to sort of bring back things. In fact, I have a list of priorities that I'm going to just talk about, of areas related to what Frank was talking about earlier, where sort of costs that have gone missing, particularly with the focus almost exclusively on price. Now, I'm not someone who thinks price is irrelevant. I don't think maybe anyone is here. But the exclusive focus on price has led us to neglect other costs. So here are some of the things that I think are important, what I'm trying to do in the book, but I also want to reach out to people in this room to encourage them to try and do this work themselves. So one area is trying to come up with actionable accounting or understanding of the labor market costs of bigness and monopoly. People are moving this direction. The White House did a lot of work in monopsony theory and so forth. But I think when you say, where's the cost? Or is the cost a mere monopoly profit? I think the accounting of the costs more fully in terms of wage stagnation and so forth is sort of known, but I think needs to be made more actionable. Another challenge, this is particularly pertinent, I think, to our discussions of Silicon Valley and the rise of what seem like stable monopoly that are lasting, is can we describe the dynamic costs of stagnant monopoly better? Can we identify, measure, have something to say about innovation gaps that occur? And we see them later. Often we see these after a breakup. You see in the 70s and 80s, the break of AT&T and the scrutiny of IBM, you see this huge flourishing of the computer communication industries. So obviously something was, there's not 100% causation is challenging, but you have a suggestion. Can you, see or anyway point to the shadow effect created by stagnant monopolies? Third, I'm interested in political antitrust. Can we come up with good measures or methods to say in some reliable way what many of us suspect, that there is a clear link between industrial concentration, political influence, and even political corruption? So can we rebuild the political case of antitrust with more, more than just, and there's nothing wrong with saying, big corporations corrupt American politics, but can we build that case very decisively and put it together, say, hey, listen, if you neglect antitrust for 20 years, if you allow high levels of industrial concentration, here will be the predictable political effects. I think that's important work to do. I'm not saying none of it has been done. I'm saying like putting this together and organizing it. So you have, I think, more concrete, better grounds for antitrust enforcers to feel, we're defending democracy with Section 2 action. And finally, the thing I'm going to focus on right now is related to the current structures of many of the important firms of our day that have, I'm going to just use this phrase, two-sided market characteristics, and getting our hands around how that should best be taken into account. That is like, all these are really important, but I think this one is extra important in our particular time, especially with what the Supreme Court is about to be involved in. And I'm going to, when I call it, my word for what I think we need to do is to understand two-sided barter markets. I think it's a challenging thing to do, but I think we need to make a go of it. Okay, well, let me get to that. So I started this talk talking about free. And so consumers, when they hear about things that are free, they get pretty excited. Antitrust enforcers and economists tend to think about two-sided markets. They think about the Jean Tirole paper, and they start going in all these weird directions about nightclubs that let in women for free and charge men, and the conversation kind of goes in that direction. So I think, and the earlier panel commented on this. Getting the right approach to two-sided markets is crucial to the future of the antitrust law enforcement, because when you become a person who thinks in terms of two-sided markets, you start seeing them everywhere, and I think that's where the world is. Like no business, you start saying, well, what businesses are one-sided markets? Because almost, like a supermarket, right, has the suppliers of the goods and then has the consumers. Well, there's a two-sided market. Obviously, we already said bars are two-sided markets. Like what is left? I guess someone who just sells their own stuff on the side of the road or something. Maybe they're not a two-sided market, but it does have this way, and so therefore, it threatens to become all of antitrust. And one way of looking at this is captured in the Second Circuit Ohio versus American Express case, which I think some of you may be following, just granted cert. The very dangerous approach, in my view, as an enforcement-oriented person, is the idea that you sort of combine all the markets together. You can't view the markets separately, and they're always viewed as a combined market, and so therefore you almost minimize the potential of economic harms because it's a two-sided market. If that Second Circuit approach is adopted by the Supreme Court, antitrust, as dead as it is gets deader than a doornail, I think, for a huge number of areas. So this is something people need to be watching. There's a good amicus that's floating around if anyone's. There's a number of amicus, but I sort of encourage people to get involved in this case. And if you know a Supreme Court justice, maybe lobby them. I don't know. All right, so that's the danger of this area. What do I say? So I want to canvass what other people say and what do I think? Are there other ways of thinking about two-sided markets, particularly relevant to tech? Well, I think maybe the most useful way to think about some of these markets, two-sided markets that aren't cash markets, are as markets that are in the intersection between cash markets on the one hand and data or attention markets on the other. All right, and so you have actually a barter situation going on. And one thing that makes this very difficult for the antitrust laws is the antitrust laws have been and will have trouble moving away from cash market analysis, because that's where, that's the legal currency. But that neglects the fact that often the consumers are paying in a different, you call it currency. They're paying either with data, giving up data for things, or they're paying with attention for whatever they're getting for free. And so one of the, so there's two approaches. So let's just stick with data for a while. There's been a lot of attention given to approaches of trying to understand the consequences of holding a large amount of data for antitrust analysis. Some of this was already previewed in earlier panels. I'm going to quote from Maurice and Alan, Maurice Stokes and Alan, is his name Gruns? I'm trying to remember, say his last name. Anyway, their approach, it's not unusual, is just roughly that you should take into account the large amounts of data in merger analysis, maybe ask whether there's some kind of just ask whether the combination of data will substantially lessen competition by giving less people an opportunity to rely on data to challenge the incumbent actors. So there's a kind of sense that accumulation of data is a barrier to market entry that becomes fortified by certain types of mergers. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't know if I have too much to add to it, but it's obviously an area that could go some direction in becoming a little more systemic, concretized. I guess I'm being practical here. I see some of my work, and I think some of us in this room need to do the work of moving some of our ideas and senses into, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having sediments important, but moving as far as we can towards actionable concepts. Everyone knows that the Europeans have at least talked about it. I'll quote Vestager where she says, it's possible in some cases data could be an important factor in how a merger affects competition. A company might buy up a rival just because of its data, exploring whether we need to start looking at mergers with valuable data involved, even though the company that owns it doesn't have a large turnover. So I'm just reviewing other things. Frank's written a paper on every topic, so he may have a paper I haven't read that is exactly on how to analyze, use data to figure things out. So that's a developing area. But I want to talk about something different, which is the use of attention markets, particularly important for the subject, this panel of advertising markets. So this is something myself and David Evans has been very active on this as well. And he has a paper. We both have papers basically coming out at the same time on attention markets and how to analyze attention markets in mergers. And I'll talk about mine because I know it better, but I want to point out that he's also doing exactly very similar work. And so the basic model is to model a company like Facebook or Google or frankly, BuzzFeed or any even broadcast media as offering something ostensibly free that the consumer wants and watches, football game or search results or whatever it is, and is paying for with their this resource value called attention, which is a limited 168 hours a week, but very valuable, especially when aggregated to a class of companies. Advertisers also valuable to politicians, anyone who is interested in influence, because what they're frankly buying more particularly is access to people's minds, even just a little bit, as we were discussing earlier. And so the intermediary is a broker between these two types of markets. Now, what's important about this approach is it helps us with some of the blind spots in antitrust law. And I want to pick on one. It's not really fair, but I want to talk about the Facebook-Instagram merger. It's not fair because it's not fair to make fun of things that happened 4 years ago. But this is a pretty good antitrust joke. So so Facebook bought Instagram. It was obvious, this was Scott's point, something seemed very obvious to the world, but not obvious to antitrust people. It was sort of obvious that Facebook was buying a competitor, and maybe its most terrifying competitor. The business press said, oh, okay, this is a brilliant maneuver. Yeah, buy them. They said, even WhatsApp, they said the same things. But it arrived on the desk. I'm not going to criticize the FTC because I used to work there, and also because they don't publish their analysis, but I will make fun of the British Office of Fair Trade. So this was their analysis at the time. They looked at two main premises. So the first is that Office of Fair Trading, I think the name was at the time. Facebook did not have a photo-taking app, so on one side of the market. So therefore, Facebook was not a serious competitor to Instagram because it wasn't competing for photos. Instagram, at the time, despite having gained a lot of people, had not yet launched its advertising business. Therefore, was not competing with Instagram. Therefore, conclusion of the office, there is no competitive consequences from the acquisition of Instagram by Facebook. The exact quote is, no substantial competition concerns arise. They did have a little thing where they said, some people have said there's potential competition, but it's too speculative to us to think about that kind of stuff. Well, it's not like we're supposed to think about the future or something. So something is missing there, right? And people, we can spend all day talking about what's missing. But one way of talking about it is to see that these two actors were competing in attentional markets. They both, even at the time, if you allow me a product, a market definition of, let's say, social media, personal social media applications, and maybe Twitter's in that, maybe Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. They had some share of the amount of hours devoted to that in the public's mind, and if you just take the market share, do HHI style analysis, it was probably a merger that substantially lessened competition and should have at least been investigated, maybe blocked. I mean, I don't know, they were pretty small at the time, but at least by WhatsApp, phase. By the time WhatsApp was being acquired, this was becoming obvious. Facebook had a program of buying its main competitors. WhatsApp, similar thing, although they're not really competitors. So it's the attentional markets that I think are the key to this. And I kind of want to urge people to get interested in this, who are interested in this tech area. And you can take our hammer called merger analysis and adapt it a little bit and go at these cases. So so as opposed to it being in cash, markets are measured in time. The consumer prices, you need to see whether prices are going up or down. That seems very important. The industry measures this by ad load, how much ads comes along with whatever the desirable content is. Does that go up and down? And I even think you can do a SNPs test in this area. So I'm going to add this to my paper. A small but significant non-transitory increase in your time wasted. So imagine, okay, here's my test. So imagine you're trying to figure out, whether or not Bing and Google are actually competing with each other, or whether they're, whether search engines are a good market definition. All right, so this is like antitrust class. This is a good market definition. Well, what happens if you? The question would be like, okay, well, imagine a hypothetical monopolist who then raises the price. Well, all right, so we have a hypothetical search engine monopolist. We now add like a 3-second delay, or even just a second delay at the beginning of the search engine operating. Right, it's just maybe you watch a little video, or just a delay. Your time is wasted for a second. Does that make you go to Facebook, or do you wait it out? I think you wait it out. I think if there's only one search engine in the world, you wait it out. I think also if you put a 1-second delay in front of Google, people go to Bing. Maybe it'd be 2 seconds. Okay, but at some point people go to Bing, but they don't go to Twitter. They don't go. So there is some way of figuring out from that whether these are competing companies or not, right? Whether they are substitutes or not. And so some of the views that are out there, like, oh yeah, Facebook and Google are, competing because everything that is trying to get your time is competing. That's just not right. So I think we can use some version of these tools to try and figure out these attentional markets, try and understand attentional market power, and go at it. And I'm not saying silver bullet, but I think there's a lot of promise in this area to try to take things forward. Now I promised I would only speak for 20 minutes. I want to just close by saying, what talk would be complete without talking about blockchain? So related. So. Some of you may know a browser named Brave and a fellow named Brendan Eich. I forget his last name. I'm getting his last name right? Yeah. Brendan Eich, who meant a lot of interesting things. So he is also going at these very interested in these attentional markets, and has, whether his will be the one that succeeds or whether it'll be something else, he's invented a currency, the BAT, the Basic Attentional Token, which is trying to be an intermediate token between users, advertisers, and publishers, where users are able to value their own attention and sort of spend it and have it have it spent on advertising if they want or not, or go have money passed to who they want to. The point is that this stuff is not all hoodoo voodoo unmeasurable stuff. I think it can be measured. I think we'll get closer to it. And maybe I'll close with this idea. I mean, one weird thing about attentional markets is, unlike cash markets, the prices are not really clear. Have you ever had the experience where you're watching, a football game or sports or whatever you like, and then somehow near the end you're like, wow, there were a lot of ads here. And if I had known that this was, if I had known this was like a $3,000 pair of sneakers, I might have thought twice about it. We don't have good measures at all for anything that is attention, that's stealing your attention. You just vaguely know, well, there's a lot of ads or not. And so but I think there are real measures. And we can make progress in this area and then conquer this territory and talk seriously about something that everyone's like, oh, it's free and no one cares about it, we shouldn't do anything. All right, thank you very much. It's been a great conference, and thanks for the organizers for having me.